So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we have the second of two sieges that TS Niehoff sent me in a series, and again this is not going to be one that has anything close to a unified theme that you can point to, unless you would consider the fact that the goblins were victorious and maybe now have a bunch of underlings that they are rallying to them to defend against some sort of rebellion. But that is a very loose theme indeed, especially when you consider there are also some orcs on the attack, but that's as close as we're going to be able to get. This is a map that we have seen once before as well, albeit this is a fairly new addition to the game. Now, I always sort of associate stone-based orcish ruins with places like Mordor and Angmar more so than anything else. Isengard a little bit more modern and fresh to the scene, and the Misty Mountains you always associate with maybe more rickety cave structures than something like this, but considering the Misty Mountains are going to be one of the pillars around which the defence is based, I guess that is what we're going to be going with today. It's also a rather interesting map. There's some big variations in terrain which the defenders can take advantage of, but also a lot of different angles they need to cover, so both sides can get what they want out of a map such as this. We'll go through the blue team, the attacking team, first and foremost, with the player who sent me the battle replay, TS Niehoff. So big thank you to him. He's going to be playing as the Orcish faction, which are on the attack, alongside a bunch of other heavily armoured factions, in all fairness, in Isengard. So you've got plenty of Uruk-hai raiders on the front line, who, to be fair, are not that heavily armoured, and wearing their leather. But their numbers are going to be very useful in a situation like this, because when you're on the attack, having more numbers that you can call upon in this sort of situation is always going to be somewhat useful. And the Uruk-hai raiders are actually pretty decent for the kind of unit that they are and the relatively low outlay that they have. Though, of course, if you want something with a bit more oomph, then you're going to punt for the Uruk-hai infantry. It's very, very rare indeed that you'll see Isengard without them, because they're a really good mix of that defensive nature with good shields, good armour, but also a good attack as well. Reasonably expensive for a line infantry unit that you're going to be sending into the meat grinder, but they are going to weather that storm better than the Uruk-hai raiders, and in conjunction with the numbers, this is a potent mix. And also in and amongst it, the other more defensively minded mainline infantry unit, the half-orc spear guard. Not as damaging, of course, with that spear malice, but defensively actually pretty much on the same level, or almost to the same level at the very least, as the Uruk-hai infantry, but they lack a lot more in terms of their attacking values because of that spear malice. Speaking of which, the Guards of Orthanc, who are a very strong defensive unit, but for the cost maybe not so much when it comes to their offense, but Isengard, I think the key here, what we've seen from these units so far, is going to be sustaining an attack with the vast majority of their numbers, and the Guards of Orthanc really are the ultimate example of that in the Isengard roster. And then damage is going to be coming from elsewhere. One such unit is cheap but cheerful, the Snaga Skirmishers. If they can get into a good position, they can start doing some good damage for a very low cost, and even if the enemy just kills them off using the resources that they would otherwise use on other units, then that's going to be at least a mini win for Isengard as well, as is the case with any cheap javelin units. The Nazkai, with their armour upgrade as well, the extra white hand symbols on their shoulder armour and their helms, very strong armour-piercing bodyguard unit, of course, with the heavy armour. And then the slightly lighter variant, the Uruk-hai Berserkers, who actually do have an extra hit point, but in every other respect they're defensively very vulnerable, but still more damage, and this is where Isengard get their damage spikes from, in addition to, of course, the Trolls of the White Hand. Big amount of damage that they're going to be able to lay down. Deploying trolls at the right time in an attacking siege like this is always going to be one of the keys to an orcish faction's success, and Isengard can tie themselves together better than most, perhaps, but they are still dependent on that sort of thing for victory. Uruk-hai crossbows as well. Getting on to a good position in this sort of map where there's a lot of, you're going to be fighting uphill pretty much the whole time, is going to be difficult, but if you can, it's going to be devastating, as crossbows are wont to be in this sort of situation. And the Isengard Ballista as well, one of the best units of siege equipment in the game. Again, similar sort of situation, albeit it might be a little bit easier to find an angle with these guys than a crossbow. If the enemy exposes themselves on an open hillside, it's going to be big damage coming their way. And then just in case they were tempted to sally out, the champions of the White Hand are going to be prowling around as well. And it's an expensive unit to use for such a thing, but it does sort of at least give you that known quantity when it comes to cavalry combat. Moving on, we have MD Catley, who is going to be playing as Numenor. Numenor, of course, well known for their quality, their heavy infantry as well, which even though they have lower numbers, as you would expect from a high-quality faction, the fact they are heavier in nature is going to mean that they should be able to weather a storm pretty well, especially alongside the likes of Isengard. The Numenorian cohort really good as a line infantry unit, especially when it comes to dealing damage in class. That is one of their selling points as Numenor. You're going to be able to move forward aggressively and do damage with units that traditionally are maybe a little bit more defensively orientated, but then there are fewer of them as well. And as if to really hammer that point home, the Numenorian shield guard with that armor-piercing edge is still subject to the spear malice, but that does mean that they're capable of mitigating that against the right kind of target, while still being a very defensively strong unit of mainline spears. And then the Balagai footmen just in behind. You can upgrade the armour on the Numenorian standard units, the Balagai units, a long way, and the Balagai footmen are made significantly stronger as a result. Albeit don't be too taken in by their more impressive appearance in this guise. They are still the sort of faction which will... but they're still the sort of unit which is not going to be able to dish out a huge amount of damage in comparison to the shield guard in front of them. They are pretty much purely a unit that is built for taking damage more so than dishing it out. In a similar vein are the Balagai archers, a very efficient unit of skirmishing archers, which in this sort of situation, again, depending on where the defenders choose to fortify themselves, the terrain disadvantage they may be at could be too high regardless of what they try to do. But if they do find themselves in a shooting match back and forth, for the price point, they're one of the best units at doing that in the game. Going to have to be a little bit more choosy with their Numenorian steel bows, though, more limited ammunition, but it is an armor-piercing archer. You know, in order to get this sort of thing outside of this particular unit in other factions, you would need to go for a bodyguard tier unit. But yeah, it's all about utilising the ammunition wisely. Another cavalry unit as well. Standard Numenorian vanguard here. I mean, they could be useful for mopping up units that do decide to sally out, but it's an aggressive unit of cavalry, and using it in a settlement like this is going to be difficult, but it is the cheapest of the Numenorian cavalry, as cheap as higher end Numenorian units get at any rate. Now, moving on, we have Erebor, played by Tweak. Erebor also in a siege. All Dwarven factions are going to have their uses on the attack as well. Again, that sturdiness is going to serve them well against their hated enemies, the goblins. The Dragon Slayers bring that armor piercing to bear, as well as being very defensively sound. That's going to be the case for most Dwarven units. I mean, when you think of a shielded heavy infantry unit, the Dwarves have the pick of the bunch in the entire game, really, outside of a few distinct exceptions. And then the Dragon Slayers are one of the very best at that sort of thing in general, with that armor piercing. The Erebor Legionaries, the higher end unit, quite similar in terms of what they're going to offer you as the Numenorian cohort that we just saw, in terms of a higher end infantry unit, very, very capable, but lower in terms of numbers, so you do need to look after them and deliver them to the front line in good condition. And then the Sons of Durin as well, offering that punch that Erebor do have when it comes to dealing a lot of damage in a short space of time with close range projectiles and shock infantry units. Erebor would certainly have that going for them. The Sons of Durin, one such example of that. Standard units of Ironfoot warriors with the armor upgrade as well, so they're going to be just a little bit more sturdy as they try to make their way through these ruins, and that's a good pick really, because obviously you're going to be a bit of a force multiplier when you're bringing this many dwarves, and then you upgrade the armor of all of them, considering their base values are also not half bad anyway. Dwarven miners to pad out the numbers, obviously they're not going to be up to as much, but just adding a bit more in terms of numbers, just in general from an attacking standpoint, is going to be useful. A couple of units of these Ironfoot pikes as well, which are a real standout because they have that armor and they also have that shield value from the front, which means you can commit them to a fight earlier without them getting shot up on sight. They will probably still be targeted, but they can put up with that sort of punishment far easier than most, and they are a more standard unit as well, so you can mass them more easily than other shielded pikes. So it's a real feather in Erebor's cap, this unit. And then we have their ranged units, and this is what I was talking about really. The Ironfoot crossbows are going to be very effective if they can get in position again, but the same problems exist as the Isengard ones. They're just a little bit bulkier on an individual basis than their Uruk-hai allies today. We also have a throwing projectile unit in the shape of the Dragon Slayer's trackers. This is a very interesting unit because the way that they wield this sort of long pointy axe is more like a spear, but the main thing that you have to consider with them, of course, is the fact that they're a high-end throwing axe unit, which is a bit of a rarity in the game, but one of the very best at doing that sort of thing. In conjunction with the Ironfoot axe throwers, the more standard offering, that has a huge amount of damage at close range that Erebor are capable of dishing out, especially when there are this many of them. An intimidating sight indeed. And then moving on, the final attacking faction we have today, going to be very similar, this one, to the Numenorians we've already spoken about, because this is Umbar, their descendants, Killeen playing as them. Corsair Blackguards, we didn't actually see the Seafarers from Numenor, but we do have the Corsairs here. Good javelins, and then they can get involved in the melee fight a little bit later on as well. Pretty decent at both, but they do need to deploy that big damage that they're capable of chucking out from their javelins to be a truly efficient unit, because they're reasonably expensive. As are the Alcarondas Legion, again similar to the Numenorian cohort. There's a few more of them, but then the blood of Numenor has diluted a little bit by the time it trickles down to Umbar, but still a very, very potent unit of line infantry this, and should be very good in this sort of situation, especially when you combine them with the standard Belagai footmen. As you can see here, the unupgraded version, the Belagai units are the same from Numenor to Umbar, difference being the blue colour scheme becomes a deep red one for Umbar. Another unit of shielded pikes, though as we were saying before, not easily massed many shielded pikes in the game, and that's certainly true for the Nirun Aru Sentinels, but also one of the bulkiest units of pikes the game has to offer, if not the, with the armour and shield. The only thing they really lack is the second hit point of the Lorien pikes, more Belagai archers, more spears as well. Corsairs here to help pad the numbers, very basic kind of unit this, as well as the Alcarondas Legion here on the flanks. We also have some armour piercing from the Umbar Axguard, which are actually reasonable in terms of melee defense for the kind of unit that they are, but still, obviously the armour piercing is the main draw. Trebuchet of Numenor, which another faction that has one of these, and once again a new colour scheme, again that deep red that Umbar are known for. The Nirun Aru Royal Guard, one of the heavier archers in the game, and also very, very good when it comes to being that skirmishing force that you want. And also some mercenary crossbows, so another mounted unit, this one a little bit more understandable though, good for sort of mopping up anyone that decides to get a little bit too bold with their sallying forth, but we'll see how much of that is going to happen. The first of the subjugated by goblins factions, as I guess we'll be calling them from now, is going to be Gondor under the command of Hidden, and when it comes to archers that are going to be really good in a skirmish fight, few are going to be as good as the veterans of Osgiliath. There aren't that many of them, but 2 hit points and armour upgrades that go all the way to gold means that they are going to be extremely resilient, and it's where the general is as well. They are locked morale anyway, but I assume they're going to be right at the very back of proceedings. A few units that can hide, so possibly some rangers are going to be lurking around in here. Nimlothian Honour Guard, a strong unit of spears which offsets the spear malice. Even at the bodyguard level that does have an impact, but less so when you've got the armour piercing of the Nimlothians, and then the slightly more aggressive these days Fountain Guard, which even now that Gondor are not quite so dependent on them as a faction as a whole as they used to be in the old days, you will still rarely see Gondor go without them because of the damage they're capable of chucking out. No armour upgrades, interestingly enough, on many of these units here. Considering Gondor have cheaper as well, that's a sign that Hidden was right on the bleeding edge of how much he could get away with. Several units of Gondor infantry and spears making up the centre of his army, which are efficient units, but you will need other things around them to win you the battle. The Trebuchet can do that at the very least, and Gondor of course don't have a Trebuchet of Numenor, but they do have 3 in a unit rather than just 2, so they can do huge damage very quickly potentially if fate is on their side. And of course more archers and ranged units from Gondor, which is a real strength of theirs. Standard archers for skirmishing, Athelian rangers for doing that damage, and then Pelagia Marines and Citadel Guard for doing damage up close with those javelins. Moving on to, I guess I've de facto made them the centre of the red team's army. The Goblins, the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, played by Colonel Speaks 46. Numbers always their main strength, but maybe less so on the defence, depending on what they've decided to bring. Moria Spearguard are an efficient unit for what they are, cheap but reasonably effective at what they do. At the time of this coming out, we haven't actually looked at the Misty Mountains as a faction yet, but they are we will be closing in on doing that. Heavy Goblin crossbows, far easier to use crossbows when you're on the defence, and they could be one of the key units for the defenders here. They target down some of the scarier units that the attackers have decided to bring. That could be one of the stepping stones on the red team's path to victory. We'll have to wait and see. Whiter Rook Fearmongers are going to be important when it comes to really laying down a solid defence as well. Again, an armour-piercing phalanx. There wasn't a huge amount of pikes from the factions as a whole. They had instances of Erebor and Umbar, but not that we could see from Isengard, interestingly enough. So maybe halberdiers could be the key for the red team as well. Goblin archers, obviously not fantastic, but when it comes to doing a bit of long-range damage, sometimes you need to make do with what you've got. Cave Troll Drummers to keep those standard goblins pointing in the right direction. We shall see how long that lasts for. Second unit of the Fearmongers with another unit of the Moria Spearguard already in defensive shape. Cave Trolls and Goblin Kingsguard over here as well. The Cave Trolls obviously not as effective as many of the other units of armoured trolls from the other factions, but there are more of them. And then the Goblin Kingsguard, an effective place to put your general. They may not be as strong as many other bodyguard units in class, but there are a number of them, and they will at least keep your goblins safer than most. Moria Spearguard here also, and then just in behind we actually start getting into the Dorwinion army, China #1 playing as them. Elvelyn infantry here in mass, and good frontline unit, solid, dependable, good armour, good stamina, all of that sort of thing. Good foil actually for the goblins potentially in terms of their mechanics, but certainly not in terms of their look. They clash a little bit, don't they? Dorwinion a little bit more resplendent than their goblin overlords. Elvelyn marksmen going to be good as well at skirmishing. Many of the factions actually deciding to bring these heavier, more sort of efficiency-based archers more so than the damaging ones, albeit Dorwinion do have the Morroquendi bows as well. The poison projectiles could be key at breaking off the attack as well if they're deployed at the right time in the battle. Morroquendi pikes also. We already mentioned how pikes may not be the be-all and end-all of the blue team's attack, so if the Morroquendi pikes position themselves just so, they could prove to be a very difficult force to overcome, especially with the elven damage they have, and also so that the Morroquendi Glade Masters are in and amongst them. And then a huge mass of these Elvelyn units as well, more infantry and more Vineguard. And then wheeling around to the other side, we have Dol Amroth, another very different looking faction, albeit they are fighting alongside Gondor as well, so more traditional allies. Joey One Kenobi playing as them. Dol Amroth Spearman, standard fare among human spears, but he has gone for the armour upgrades, interestingly enough, so individual units being prioritised a little bit more. Belfalas Marines, obviously cheaper and easier to mass now for Dol Amroth, so good javelins for the defence here and plenty of opportunities to use them in the sort of winding nature of the interior of this settlement. Dol Amroth men-at-arms on the front line also. Dol Amroth halberdiers, obviously again we mentioned how they could be effective as well. More men-at-arms, plenty of the halberds, more of the spears, and at the centre of things we also see Dol Amroth's very well regarded swordsmen, Parathil champions, fear as well. Fear causing units for both sides could be key. And then we have Belfalas Marines over here, more men-at-arms, more Belfalas Marines, and I'm certain I've missed a few things. There's probably a few units, especially in these clumps of defending forces. All Talon Knights up on the hill, and also another Trebuchet of Numenor and the Haven Guard, so all of the quality and all of the real damage is up there. But I think we will make a cut, because I think there's going to be a fair amount of manoeuvring. The red team are going to be allowed to get themselves into defensive shape within the settlement, and also the blue team kind of need to determine who's going to go where in the settlement. It's apparent to a certain extent, but they will want to mix and match a little bit, I'm sure. So I'll make a little bit of a cut, and we'll rejoin when the first blows are being struck. So I do think this fight is going to be largely decided by how quickly all of the attackers can turn this into as multi-front an affair as possible, considering there are a number of ways that you can try and make your way up to the summit of the settlement. This is going to be the challenge for the defenders, but in a 4v4 it's not quite so crushing as it would otherwise be. But also considering the heavier nature of the attacking factions today, they should be able to weather a decent storm, so a bit of aggression and trying to put that pressure on. It doesn't need to be overwhelming initially, but it does need to at least be present in multiple areas. Ironfoot Warriors with the armour upgrade should have it in them to be able to defeat the Elvelyn infantry. I mean, with the terrain disadvantages and maybe some range support, that will change, but generally speaking you will expect a hefty Dwarven melee unit to be able to defeat the equivalent human unit. Also some support coming up from Umbar as well, so some decent quality units actually following through. A little bit more open over here, so more room to manoeuvre, but also a few more instances where you can set up a pretty nasty crossfire, and if they have noticed the fact that these crossbows are both positioned over here, that might be why they're sending more of a token force to attack this area, which is reasonably wise, I would say. And then over here, Umbar with a smaller force. You can head across this bridge and try and circumvent the situation, but of course we know the issues with using bridges in Medieval 2, and there is still a defensive force waiting over here, so it's pretty well telegraphed if Umbar send their whole army up here, and it'll be easier for the defenders to bank up on that side anyway, but not an immediate danger of that just yet. Perhaps as well waiting for some of these units to expose themselves so the shield value isn't coming into effect. Actually going after the Naru Naru Royal Guard, which standard Goblin ammunition is not going to be of the highest quality. Going after some Corsairs and the Ironfoot Axe Throwers. I mean, again, the Dwarven units as a general rule are going to be pretty bulky from the front, even these skirmishing units. But still, we did note the heavy presence of all of those Dwarven Axe Throwers within the Erebor army. Keeping an eye on the mini-map as well. It doesn't look like proceedings have got underway on the other side, and when things are a little bit lopsided, it does tend to play into the defenders' hands, so they will be reasonably happy with that. We did note the Balagire Archer presence for the attackers as well. This is one way in which they can really trade back and forth quite nicely. Having said that, between the two, Elvelyn have the better armour, especially when the Balagire don't upgrade their armour like this, but the shield value does make a real difference in this sort of engagement. Sons of Durin have been committed reasonably early on as well. Obviously they will be extremely domineering against the Elvelyn units from Dorwinion, which is probably why we're seeing more support being brought in, and also a unit of pikes to try and keep those deadly warhammers at bay a little bit more. Some spears also close enough by that they can be committed in a pinch as well, but so far neither side will be too worried about things. Both have got reinforcements close by if they need to commit them, and both have got supporting units doing their thing as well. The main entrance a little bit too wide and a little bit too exposed to defend for the defenders, so they're allowing Numenor all of this territory, but it's kind of a dead area of the map really. Like I said, it's much better for the defenders to try and bank up around an area like this where you've got terrain and a narrower point that you can hold on to, but there are quite a few of them, 3 of them over on this side of the map to try and cover, reasonably separate from one another, but Isengard will presumably also be moving forward at some point, but more natural allies in Gondor and Dol Amroth alongside one another. Rank and file very similar, but as soon as you get into their higher tiers you can see the difference in approach from the two factions. And the Elvelyn marksmen still going after the infantry, allowing themselves to just tank all of that archer damage and instead trying to go after the more pressing concern, which will certainly be that Dwarven shock infantry, but also the axe throwers, who are trying to do a bit of damage as the Elvelyn Vanguard, their presence on the front line, deemed to be necessary. Sons of Durin still victory, and again, even in this situation where they are exposed to arrow fire, that Dwarven armour is going to be paying for itself relatively easily, and you can see as well they're trying to wrap around the flank with some warriors, so this is good work from Erebor, and immediately as well actually. In conjunction with the high damage of the axe throwers, that is enough to rout that Dorwinion frontline, so they are going to need to reset themselves a little bit, maybe call upon some reinforcements from elsewhere. Over here, meanwhile, the attack yet to get underway, but now moving forward. Been impressed with how Erebor have acquitted themselves so far. This area, like we said, is probably a little bit less likely to be successful because of the crossbows, but as soon as they start gaining ground in one area, they move forward and start testing the waters against the goblins as well. Standard infantry and the Moria spear guard, but again, when it comes to outright quality, you would certainly back the dwarves against the goblins in this sort of situation. Of course, I think they did pull their axe throwers back though, indeed they did. Being a little bit more restrained with the skirmishers from both sides on this part of the map. I would imagine the Goblin Archers will be the first port of call to try and help hold those Ironfoot warriors back a little bit more. I mean, Umbar have been given the green light to completely cross the bridge without any sort of immediate pressure put on them, but there is a waiting line of goblins and some forces from Dorwinion back here as well that will meet them. It's also not the highest quality of units. Balagire footmen won't strike fear into the defenders' hearts exactly. Meanwhile, still trying to get in with that skirmishing. I mean, both sides here have got reasonable compositions to be able to take at least basic arrow fire reasonably well. So it's going to be reasonably difficult for the attackers to get a huge amount of value, but just putting some pressure on while the infantry assault is underway is usually enough to give them pause for thought. Meanwhile, over here, Umbar moving forward to help consolidate where the dwarves push through and not letting Dorwinion breathe for the moment. Ironfoot warriors continuing forwards along with those Sons of Durin. Again, it's just standard Elvelyn units standing in the way, which are not going to be enough to contain the dwarves if Dorwinion continue to put these speed bumps in the way. They need something a little bit stronger. Fortunately, those Citadel Guard are just in behind. Those javelins will certainly help, and then in melee, that little armor-piercing sting that they have should also be enough to help keep the dwarves in line. More Gondorian reinforcements heading over here as well, standard infantry, so perhaps seeing that this is where the attackers have had their early success. Gondor moving to the aid of Dorwinion. just standard units for the time being, but numerous ones. As long as they can keep the dwarves bottled up in these narrower sections, they can use some of these skirmishes, more hungry bows as well. You can rout Erebor, but it is more difficult than your standard fare. What's that crossbowmen in position as well? It's not an ideal angle of fire for them, but they are damaging. Pretty much the ultimate glass cannons, even among crossbows. And over here, again, a reasonably wide front line. Corsairs routing immediately as the snow trolls clatter into them. They may not be quite as impressive in these sort of foot slogger engagements as some of the armoured trolls from the other orcish factions, but they will absolutely do the job against these fodder class units from Umbar. Balagaya footmen won't exactly be the ideal salve for that wound either. The Sons of Durin moving forward again have been pretty much centrepiece of everything Erebor have been trying to do so far, and they will of course be very good against the standard goblins. What little defensive nous they have comes courtesy of their ramshackle armour. It's really all of these supporting units which are the key here. Difficult to gauge how much damage the Snaga javelins and the goblin crossbows are actually doing. And also now Umbar moving forward, so both the dwarves and Umbar moving in tandem with one another. Fearmonger's trying to help settle down the front line, but it's not going to be quite so easy because the dwarves are also moving forward their own polearm unit in the Ironfoot pikes. The cave trolls moving forward, however, will be a good answer to that. On high as well, the Elvalin marksmen continuing to fire away. Erebor legionaries moving in, as well as the Umbar Axe Guard. So this is now a full-blooded engagement. Both sides have committed some pretty serious units in there. Trying to go after the crossbows, and they will manage it as well. The cave trolls, there's no stopping them really, unless you have a very substantial and thick front line. They will be able to push their way through. They just won't be able to stay standing as long as the other trolls in the game. Just being in here, and this does increase the likelihood of routing, and you can see some of the Dwarven units are suffering a little bit mentally now. And then the Umbar Axe Guard trying to add their damage dealing to try and help bring down the other unit of trolls. The snow trolls may not be as substantial as the armoured trolls from the other factions, but they are stronger individually than the cave trolls at least. It's getting a bit stretched, this front line, and the reinforcements are a little bit more substantial for the defenders, a little bit more readily available. The question is there going to be reinforcements forthcoming from over here? Blackguards and mounted crossbows adding their support to the front line. The Naru Sentinels are a significant unit, but not exactly quick when it comes to damage dealing. So they are reliant on those ranged support units to really do the business. Mountain Orc Berserkers and Standard Goblin Infantry who are routing, so Umbar are making some gains over here. Misty Mountain's lower morale being exposed a little bit there. Good position for the Snaga, who presumably will be going after the pikes. Dorwinion, what will they be doing? Meanwhile, the melee engagement begins over on this side of the settlement as well, with Isengard taking the lead against Dol Amroth, Perithil champions and spears, trying to hold back all of the raiders, with again the trolls at the centrepiece, as the centrepiece I should say, but it's time for the attackers, perhaps in a more traditional manner in which we see them, shuffling themselves around. Dol Amroth men-at-arms, Gondor archers as well, not yet opening up a second front. Numenor, meanwhile, close by, are doing that. Numenor and Shieldguard, of course, contrary to Isengard, they have got far less in the way of manpower to be able to sustain these sorts of assaults, but you would also back them to beat pretty much everything Dol Amroth have 1-to-1 outside of some notable exceptions at the high end. And the Shieldguard against the Dol Amroth spears will do very nicely, and the Numenorian cohort will only increase that sort of advantage. Floating in those attacks from the archers down low. Amroth men-at-arms trying to shuffle themselves around as well. They do have plenty of reinforcements nearby, so there's no immediate threat to collapse, but that pressure will only build. Meanwhile, in this very narrow section of the map, Dorwinion, with a bit of the Gondorian support they received, have completely clogged the area, so it's going to be difficult for Erebor to make the kind of progress they made early. Naru Royal Guard trading back and forth with the Dorwinion archers that are in position. further down, still some reinforcements, including the Glade Masters. So as much as the initial engagement didn't really go too well for them, I think Dorwinion are in a reasonably comfortable spot here now. It's going to come down to whether or not some of these other areas start to bear fruit for the attackers. And to be fair, down here, the Misty Mountains-led efforts have done pretty well. Dragon Slayer's trackers moving in. I mean, Erebor have been very active throughout the battle so far. Dwarves, not known for having huge armies, are they going to be able to sustain these sorts of losses, especially when you consider that many of these forces are now not exactly in an ideal position. Goblin Kingsguard and Trolls, and a little bit unfortunate to get a whole bunch of friendly fire there, but that is the gamble you take with artillery, although that was very unfortunate in all fairness. Dragon Slayers, trackers. Balance of forces is evenly matched. I mean, they are a very accomplished unit in melee as well. It's just whether or not they have the numbers to be able to sustain this assault for any length of time. Corondas Legion have moved forward to help back things up, but they need more overwhelming units. Or yes, the axe throwers will do a good job against the White Orc Fearmongers as well. Drummers close by, keeping the goblins pointing in the right direction for just that little bit longer, actually getting into melee, which is an interesting call. The drummers are not particularly great in melee, so the Corondas Legion should bring them down. Or the trebuchets again, but missing. So far the artillery not managing to do its thing. The Blackback Berserkers and the Javelin support over here has also scuppered any hopes of an Umbar flanking force coming to the rescue to the units from the front side of the ruins. Fight for a little bit longer, but not for that much longer if the Blackbacks are the ones that are after them. They have taken a decent amount of damage in doing this, but worthwhile I think, because it basically clips the wings of whatever Umbar were trying to accomplish over here. Merc crossbows will also have to retreat back across the bridge and recycle themselves, otherwise they will just get ripped to shreds in melee by a unit like this. Dorwinion didn't even have to commit their infantry over here, so from this point, the defenders are looking fairly good. Again, that can turn around with the use of artillery and the like. It's a bit more of a dynamic side of the battle over here. Victory. Distinct possibility for some of those Umbar forces, but not all of them. And the goblin numbers coming in handy here. But many of the goblins that are on the front lines are honestly very poor quality in melee, so it looks maybe a little bit worse than it is for the dwarves and Umbar over here. The linchpins really are the Fearmonger unit here, the Trolls, and then what's left of the Kingsguard. But if they manage to weather this storm, the attackers, they could be able to break through just based on the low quality of the goblins. Not with much, perhaps, but anything is better than nothing. Also, Blackguards moving forward. The Snaga Skirmishers still been up in this position now for quite a while. A real thorn in the side of the attackers. Blank fires once again. And over here, trying to just filter through, managing to find a gap, and that's well spotted by Numenor. Numenorian cohort will move in, and that will force a lot of these projectile units to retreat. Belfast Marines getting a point-blank volley. Some extra damage done. When you're in behind enemy lines like this, if enemy infantry units are in a good position to do the business against you, it can be a problem. That was the Goblin General. Probably the most significant general loss that could have happened on the field has. So the Misty Mountains will really struggle, I think, to hold on to that location now. Not much movement over here. Javelins raining down in a rather inaccurate fashion. And this is risky because you could hit your own men by doing this. Managing to get a grazing blow on the enemy forces, not devastating to them, but also crucially not devastating to yourself. Good movement there. Meanwhile, yeah, a lot of the goblins now looking like they could rout the superior quality of the attackers starting to come in, and as I said, it can turn around reasonably fast, and that is what is happening here by the looks of things. Corondas Legion wrapping around, certainly taking a lot of damage for their heroism, but if they can secure this area, it means that they can start moving through the settlement, and it starts giving the defenders something else to think about as well. The possibility of having to cycle over some units from Gondor and Dol Amroth to help keep these forces at bay could also help out with Numenor and Isengard's attempts to advance further in. Also Blackguards angles maybe aren't ideal. Some of these Dorwinion units that were in reserve having to be committed to try and at least stymie the momentum a little bit. Gondor infantry moving in, returning from routing, but presumably they will go straight back to routing in double quick time. Wolves, Dragon Slayers being committed forward, and again starting to turn up the pressure. This battle has ebbed and flowed a little bit, and the Dragon Slayers are not the sort of thing that you can afford to take lightly at all. And they will crunch through some of these heavily armoured Dorwinion and Gondor units. The Blade Masters will be an interesting opponent for the Dragon Slayers to face, though. The Elves might back themselves with that finesse of theirs. Meanwhile, Numenor have managed to make it stick somewhat, although they do need to get more units back here, because that cohort is under extreme pressure and they can rout. And the numerous javelins of Dol Amroth proving to be a bit of a boon for them in this situation, because if they manage to intercept one, Dol Amroth can simply bring another one forwards to continue the armour-piercing onslaught. Some of the more depleted spears routing. And that's probably not helping matters for Numenor. Getting a bit of friendly fire from the ballista is enough to make the Belfast Marines think about routing as well, but they were in good enough condition to be able to ride that wave. Some Gondor infantry being taken off. Isengard turning up the pressure. I mean, you can see the difference between what Numenor and Isengard are doing. Numenor are having to be a little bit more careful, trying to deliver that quality and let that do the work. Isengard, meanwhile, using that good old-fashioned orcish numbers approach, try and force their way through. Though they will have even more of an issue in keeping their units from routing than Numenor will. If it's raiders that are going in behind enemy lines, then it's far more likely that they'll end up routing and buckling under the pressure than not. And there's still plenty of skirmishers that can help hasten that along. Gondor archers point blanking all of the Uruk-hai as they push their way through. More Gondor infantry there to block the way. Belfast Marines doing the same. More reinforcements coming down from on high, including the Talon Knights. So, recognising the danger that Isengard are posing here, responding in kind. Gondor and Dol Amroth did also notice as well some of the Gondor spearmen down here, the first line of defence, maybe trying to go after those crossbows. Gondor archers will do the same. Nazkai in and amongst things to prevent any sort of infantry counter-attack, but they're pretty much powerless to do anything about the Gondorians from shooting them from up there unless Isengard can intercept them with the infantry, which looks to be what they're attempting to do. In numbers as well. I mean, this is a significant moment for Isengard, because if this doesn't work, they don't really have much left to offer. But this is going to be difficult to completely defuse at this point. And those high-quality Dol Amroth reinforcements are all well and good, but they've got a little bit more space to work with now, Isengard. Actually, still a fairly flat engagement. But the depth of that Isengard front line is higher. The quality is lower, but they still have instances of units like the Uruk-hai infantry are no slouches, of course. The Guards of Orthanc at the centre of things are going to be difficult to get rid of, especially for these non-armour piercing units. The Trolls are still alive as well. They've been alive for a while. They're starting to run into more Perithal champions and halberds now, and fountain guards, so that should bring them down, but a large amount of spearmen have fallen to the wayside from them, I'm sure. Via archers and footmen. So Numenor still able to find those gaps, but still having to be careful because their manpower situation could run away from them if they aren't careful. And over here, still slowly but surely pushing their way forwards. Nandor Glade Guard now over here, as well as the Glade Masters. And that spike of quality looks like it's going to be enough. Dorwinion have managed to reclaim the advantage in this engagement over here. That's something for the defenders. Some crossbows nearby trying to do their thing. Fencers moving back also. So securing this area over here, the last of the goblins deciding to abandon the area up here and fall further back within the settlement into the slightly more canyony environment at the heart of the ruins. They can regroup themselves, they can start putting pressure on the top of the settlement, and it will be interesting to see what the defenders think about doing then. If they maintain their positions elsewhere, it's a bit of a risk. It means that they technically won't have anywhere to fall back to. Some more Numenorian reinforcements making their way forwards now. Pelagia Marines with pretty much nowhere to retreat to at this point, running into a line of Numenorian spears. Artillery blow. And arcing those shots, that is risky. Gondorians trying to go after this blob of Numenorian units, which is fair enough, but in the end they ended up getting a bit of friendly fire and routing what little Dol Amroth resistance remained. So neither side has really been crushing with their artillery, at least from what we've seen. The ballista moving forwards would like to change that, I'm sure. Trolls still doing their thing. Artillery. Again, they're pretty unfortunate there, Gondor, because that was a decent target they could go after and the artillery still missed, but again, you can't pin your hopes on artillery alone, not unless you have pretty much a perfect shot, and that one is one that needs to be arced a little bit. Some Uruk-hai Berserkers at the centre of things going to be ideal for dealing with many of the Dol Amroth and Gondor infantry forces that they're facing off against now. And now, Numenor and Isengard are meeting up. They'll be able to coordinate their efforts in a more direct fashion. There goes another general. Artillery sounded like it hit something very close to what it was. And there goes little remains of the resistance up here. I believe that would have been the Dwarven general. I mean, we could try and tell, because I think the Glade Masters may very well be where the Dorwinion general is. Completely missed that. Which general was it? Yeah, there's the Dorwinion general. The Vintner Lord, with his elven forces. Meanwhile, further in, that means that the Erebor general has gone, and as we have said, they're not completely immune to routing, and considering how thin on the ground they may be at this point, trying to force their way through, I mean, there's a fairly long path up to the top here, and they are banking up a bit of a defence for them. Damage will be forthcoming on the way through as well. The Moripandi bows will have their pick of the targets. And another advantage of being the defenders on this map. That's the Isengard general. Champions of the White Hand moved forward there. And you can see that they are starting to bring stuff back. They will be defending the hilltop. Isengard will be pretty bummed that they lost their general there, of all places, especially when there wasn't really a need to try and force the issue there. They were already winning. It was all just a matter of trying to wrap things up for the initial phases of the battle in as neat a fashion as you possibly could. But in the end, didn't quite go the way they were hoping, I'm sure. Parathor champions' defeat seems certain. Only 8 of them remain. Halberdiers are doing a decent job, considering they've been fighting a bit of a grim battle for quite a while at this point. Still, those trolls are alive. Not many of them, but yeah, it does go to show that if you don't focus them down with anything in particular, it can be an issue for them. There goes the Umbar general. Rockwendy Glade Lords doing their thing. So again, another attacking general. Umbar, known for having a few units of locked morale, but I don't know how many of them they necessarily brought along with them off the top of my head. So here at the centre of things, taking another pathway, another potential pathway anyway, up to the summit of the settlement. There goes the Vintner Lord as well, the Harbingers of Castamere going up against the Glade Masters. So trading generals, which is still, I mean, we're around the halfway point of the battle at this point, and a lot of the generals on the field actually have fallen. Routing has been a bit of a theme so far as well, so that may very well continue and could still be one of the main deciding factors of the battle as a whole. A few of those clear projectiles coming from this Corsair's fences. Rockwendy bows still in a good position as well, and absolutely ripping through the Corsair crossbowmen, as well they should. I don't know if they have ammunition. If they don't, then this is a good gambit from Killeen, because it means that that's a large amount of damage potential that's being spent on a unit that doesn't have much left in it, but based on the fact they just drew their crossbows out again, I think they do still have ammunition. Mentioned their glass cannon nature, and especially when you put them in front of an elven archer of all things. I'm surprised the poison projectiles haven't routed them yet. The whole unit will actually end up perishing before they get the chance to rout, which is a good thing in a way. The Castamere doing a good job on the front line, though the Glade Lords already having faced down impressive foes up until this point. Still victory seems certain. No damage being done really by the Glade Guard. Glade Lords are very thin on the ground now. Trebuchet of Numenor moving around. Very token effort of a force over here though, some throwing projectiles, but ultimately Gondor should be able to overwhelm this side note of an advance with sheer numbers, and that's exactly what they're doing. Gondor Spearmen admittedly shaken, but I think that might be down to the fact they're getting a bit of friendly fire from those Morroquendi bows, and they were taking point blank hits from javelins and axe throwers, but banking up to them in melee should prevent any of that from being a problem. Spearmen doing a good job. They're up. Gondor archers. I mean, Isengard are wasting no time. They claimed the initiative, and now, being the vanguard in this engagement, Numenor will undoubtedly follow with a bit of extra quality, and this could be where the battle gets won or lost. Athenian Rangers, you'd hope from a Gondor perspective that they've been able to use their ammunition, but they aren't going to be able to hold Isengard at bay for too much longer, you would imagine. The Ballista poking through as well. Still a few trolls. The Haven Guard getting caught out as well. That's a bit of a tragedy. So it's a bit of a struggle for the attackers on the other side. They did a fair amount of lifting early on and now tiring a little bit, but now taking up the mantle of the attackers on this side, they've managed to score some pretty good gains. They will need to, I mean, the Nazkai and Berserkers are over here, so that should be enough to bring down a surrounded unit of Haven Guard. Yeah, this would have been a very useful unit for the defenders to have access to in their final stand at the summit of the ruins, but they will have to make do without them. Axeguard and Menelaus, a nice bit of armour-piercing punch for late on as well, a bit more support from the Naru Royal Guard. It's always nice to have a bit of range support in the late game. Can really make a real difference. Dorwinion and Gondor. Still over here, Gondor with some artillery. Numenor. Interesting little bit of a counter-attack over here. Gondor just landing Lothian on a guard though. They're going to get surrounded and surely taken down. I mean, the close proximity of the Morroquendi bows might buy them a bit of time, and ultimately it's not the highest level of Numenor quality that they're facing off against. They may be able to show their ancestors a thing or two in this particular fight. The Lothians. My personal favourite Gondorian unit, I think. Some Numenorian cohort finishing off some dregs over here as well. Some projectiles against Numenor. And Numenorian cohort struggling a little bit. Another general falls, and that's where the Haven Guard are, so that will be Dol Amroth losing their general also. You can see here. This is technically as far back as they can fall back to, making it a one choke point affair, but I don't think they're going to be able to do that. Things are still a little bit scattered throughout the settlement, which, generally speaking, when things get a little bit broken up like this, a bit more chaotic, it tends to favour the attackers, but when you've got mixed factions like this, it's not quite so clear. The Gondorian general, one of the only generals left alive, I think him and the Numenor general are the only ones left standing actually. Veterans of Osgiliath, of course, very sturdy, easily going to be able to defeat Snaga skirmishers, although there are Uruk-hai infantry over here. The general himself also in close proximity to some of the Uruk-hai and taking a few hits as well. The Veterans of Osgiliath are tough to kill. It would be unfortunate for Gondor to lose their general quickly in that sort of engagement at any rate. Gondor Spearmen turning back around, managing to intercept the Ballista. I don't know how many bolts they had left in it. I think they used up all their ammunition. No dwarves are going to be advancing from that direction. Trebuchet carcasses over here. I mean, give the Haven Guard their credit. They didn't go down without a fight. They stayed standing in an engagement they were doomed to lose for quite a while. It'll be an interesting dynamic if the attackers are able to effectively take the summit of the settlement and then have to go back down through it to try and clear what remains of the defenders out. That trebuchet really needs to be the centrepiece of the defence now, but getting it up the hill is a slow and laborious process. The armour piercing on the shield guard might very well be the deciding factor here, because the Nimlothian Honor Guard, they're fighting well, but there's surely a limit on how much a unit of this size is going to be able to accomplish. And it's coming around the corner there, Erebor Guard, so more Numenor reinforcements. Unlikely to be what the Gondorians wanted to see in this situation. Numenorian cohort trying to push their way up the hill, but numbers for the defenders here are actually enough where they should win that. So again, it's still a bit of a bits and pieces kind of battle overall. There's no obvious winner or loser at this moment in time. The defenders are doing quite well in many areas. The main area where I think they will be concerned is still with the kind of momentum that Isengard exhibited, although they have managed to stymie that a bit, and it's turned into a bit more of a slow-paced affair around here as well. The infantry and the Guards of Orthanc that did manage to force their way this far, getting overwhelmed by the forces that they're meeting. Trying to show Numenor crew as well, a bit of extra armor piercing, which Gondor tend to be a little bit more defensive in melee, but they will need a bit of extra damage, especially when they're still facing down the remnants of that Nazkai unit, an infantry unit which is pretty much ideally placed to fight most of their infantry units, especially with a bit of extra troll support. But Isengard don't have limitless manpower now either. It did take it out of them to make it up to this point. It's just a case of who has a sufficient amount left in the tank, really. Crossbows trying to offer their support, but again, trying to arc your bolts in this sort of situation is tough. You may as well try to, even though it does take away a bit from crossbow effectiveness, but there's no position you can really take up that will allow you to do that well. Trebuchet and Umbar are just running around there. Gondor archers, meanwhile, archers less susceptible to that sort of thing and going after the Uruk-hai. So for the moment, the defenders are actually doing quite well, probably the ones that have the edge at this point in time, because there's not really any engagements that the attackers are winning notably. Maybe you could say that fight against the Nimlothians, but close by they were losing another one, and now they've managed to get themselves into a much more advantageous position. Morroquendi bows have been one of the main damage dealers actually for the defenders. Consistent high elven damage being delivered unto the attackers, and again the Axeguard of Manelos have got good Numenorian armour but no shields. The elven archers have the sufficient level of damage. Morroquendi bows firing away as well. Nandor Glade Guard adding their own extra spike of damage, and this may be where the lower melee defense of heavy axe units means that the Numenorian axemen start to fall away as well. The question has to be asked at this point, how much do the attackers have left in them? Numenor do have more reinforcements that they are committing forwards now. Steel bows as well. I mean, quite a lot of these Numenor units are loitering around too far away from the fight. Reinforcements not close enough. Trying to use their ammunition, but they're being engaged in melee. That is something that both sides have actually been good at, is circumventing engagements that are kind of in the way and trying to go after the skirmishers in behind to prevent any sort of support coming in. Trebuchet, maybe a little bit of indecision. I mean, I think initially they were planning on banking up at the top of the hill, but I think now they realise they're actually in a reasonably good position, although the Isengard Ballista forcing its way through. What happened here? This engagement was doing reasonably well a moment ago. Was the Nazkai's pressure too much, 20 of them? So now things have turned around again. The attackers certainly have an area of the field now where they're doing quite well for themselves. The Isengard Ballista doing its thing. Citadel Guard. I mean, if they were to turn around, the spears would probably be enough to maul the Numenorian vanguard pretty substantially. They're electing to continue their retreat. Some of the remaining blackbacks in there as well. So now this is an interesting conundrum, because it may end up being, as I said, where the defenders have technically been forced off the prime real estate of the map. What do they do from there? Also, still they've got to deal with a lot of these Numenorian units that are over here, which are not the most damaging, but they are difficult to kill quickly. fully upgraded spears, the Narun Aru as well, and Narun Aru are locked morale to boot, so you can't even rely on that kind of pressure coming in. They will maintain themselves. No bodyguard units for Numenor, interestingly enough, which has actually helped, I think, because it's given them that average level of quality that's just a bit higher. Plenty of cohort and shield guard, which have been central to their efforts, but it does mean they won't have that extra bit of damage to lean on in the late game. They're now kind of caught in between things a little bit. The heights of the settlement have been claimed. The steel bows in melee are not half bad, but obviously still the trolls. The trolls of the White Hand, only 3 of them remain, but very heavy lifter in this game, as have been the Nazkai. There are still 19 Blackback Berserkers in all fairness. This would be an interesting fight to behold if it were an even one, but it is certainly not. The attackers pressing home their numbers advantage against the Berserkers. Blackbacks are orcs rather than goblins, I suppose, but one of the Trebuchet crew beholding the rest of the crew are further down there. Well, I mean, this could be a real difference maker. This has probably been the most direct artillery hits that we've seen so far in the battle, only against Belagaya footmen. Actually, no, there are some Narun Aru in there as well, but they need a win here, and they need a win badly. They need to do as much damage as quickly as possible to these units so they can try and put up a united front against primarily Isengard-led assault, which is going to be crashing down on them from above. Problem is, though, steel bows, not a huge amount of ammunition, but as long as they can ratchet up a decent kill count for themselves in this situation, they will be setting their team up for future success, you would imagine. Which is a distinct possibility. Trebuchet still firing away. Can scarcely miss, surely. Only a grazing blow. I mean, I guess they didn't miss, but not the kind of return they would have been hoping for. Trebuchet cranks back into place. Surely a hit this time, yeah, direct. So Numenor will go on to lose this engagement, but it's just a case of how much damage they can do beforehand. Timely value being netted there by that Trebuchet. Some Morroquendi bows over here, the Numenorian vanguard, making life difficult for them, but their long weapons will be a problem for the Numenorian cavalry in melee. They will certainly not have it all their own way. Friendly bows, trying to do what damage they can. Nazkai, some of the Glade Guard kind of getting in the way. Position for the ballista. This they can fire down into the position which actually Gondor are currently occupying. I think the attackers are in a slightly better position here. Gondorians, Veterans of Osgiliath are good, but
the battle is very much in our favour. Victory will be ours.
I think the quality of some of the units the attackers still have left in the position they occupy is probably going to be a bit too much for what at this point is a largely Gondorian effort to hold on to the ruins from the defenders. Trebuchet still firing, but I mean at this point what does it go after? It's a little bit difficult. If it hits the veterans, that's going to be a bit of a problem for them. The ballista are probably going to go here to try and do the business against them. Still a reasonable length of time to go in this battle as well, which is strange in a way, considering you'd imagine proceedings would be wrapped up from here in a reasonably timely manner. To fire down from on high as well, those Numenorian steel bows going into melee first earlier on before utilising their ammunition, so it's decent battlefield awareness that from Numenor, utilising their... well, there's the bouncing projectiles of the Trebuchet. I mean, another good hit. Steel bows so far have been dealt hefty blows from the Gondorian Trebuchet. Nice downhill charge from the vanguard, as long as they cycle out quickly, because the Citadel Guard are kryptonite to any sort of cavalry that lingers in melee with them for too long. And over here, we still seem certain for the Veterans of Osgiliath. It's a slow process though. Cavalry cavalry still punching on through. I think it's at this point just trying to make your defeat as valiant as possible, unless I'm missing something, unless they've got some unit that'll sweep in from nowhere, because they won't be able to win up here, I wouldn't... Well, Morriquendi Bow's actually doing a surprisingly good job. What happened to the Nazgul? Or the Nazkai, I should say. Could the Morriquendi do the business? Got that extra bit of damage, a bit of elven finesse against the steel bows who've already taken a bit of a beating from the trebuchet on low ground. Small matter of trying to silence those crossbows as well. It has been back and forth this. Both sides have claimed the momentum back off each other several times at this point. Who will have it in the all-important final moments of the match, though? Trebuchet out of ammunition now, so the crew can help the veterans of Osgiliath try and overwhelm this position. Maybe the defenders do have enough left in the tank. Still, some of these Nimlothian Honor Guard are still alive, given the situation they were in. Only 2 of them remain, but continuing to fight and skewer their enemies. No shame about the pathfinding here. Citadel Guard trying to prevent those Numenorian vanguards from doing their thing, but managing to actually go perfectly through the lanes between the individual units. Unfortunately for the Numenorian vanguard, this is actually the one situation where having the trebuchet be standard spearmen instead of the trebuchet of Numenor is actually going to be pretty nice for them, because that means you're going to have that anti-cavalry bonus. Try and bring down this cavalry unit, which, as time goes by, is becoming a little bit more important when they manage to land those charges. Up here, meanwhile, Wendy Bow's starting to lose ground a little bit. The numbers, maybe, the key. Try and finish off those Uruk-hai crossbows before doubling back and helping their fellow elves. Victory seems certain. There goes the Numenor general, so that means we're just down to the Gondorian one now, I believe. But he's been fighting on this front line for a little while against foes that fancy their chances of claiming his head. Maybe no general will be left alive by the tail end of this one. And the Gondorians, it's hard to pick units apart from one another unless they have like a distinctive cape or something like that. Did the Gondorian general die? Possibly missing things, the things are starting to blur together. I think he perished. Citadel Guard getting involved now, the cavalry finally being laid low. Trebuchet crew doing their thing as well. It is interesting to note actually how confident the attacking announcer still seems to be. Nothing in Honor Guard still doing its thing. There is a unit on the minimap over here allegedly. Trebuchet of Numenor that is routing. Also got, Numenorian Shield Guard. 123 of them. Did they simply get forgotten about? If they had these guys in melee, this would not be the arduous task that it is proving to be at the moment. Because, I mean, they may have to actually win the battle for the attackers at this point. It'd be most unfortunate if... Well, there goes the final general on the field, but from an attacker perspective, if you end up losing because you forgot to commit one of your units of heavy spears to the general advance and left them in the deployment zone, that would be most unfortunate. Of course, the defenders will be grateful recipients of said fortune, I'm sure, but still. Morriquendi bows fighting hard, although the armour of the steel bows has certainly served them well here. The positioning of those ballistas as well has probably been a pretty substantial thing as this battle has worn on. Seven of the ballista crew remain. I don't think the Morriquendi bow is going to have the staying power, which means there will be a few of those steel bows left alive as well. Still that full unit of shield guard, which these units are not going to be able to take care of now because it's pretty much just the trebuchet crew that have any sort of genuine substance to them. So I think the attackers will just about managed to carry the day here. Citadel Guard trying to get in behind. Do they still have ammunition? That would be a fairly significant development. Getting shanked by the banner carrier. Citadel Guard don't mess around in melee either. This one Nimlothian Honour Guard facing off against the Naru Royal Guard. You'd imagine the armour piercing of the Nimlothian will see him over the line as they sort of take turns to try and stab through the plate of their opponent. Battle of the Champions. He managed to stagger him there. Both heavily bloodied, both been involved in this fight for quite a while at this point, so this battle is for pride, more so than the overall result. And the fact that they're an archer by trade as well means that he is staggering his opposition. The more of those hits that he lands. This, interestingly enough, is probably the best example of why spears are good defensively, because they are more likely to stagger the opponent because of how quickly they attack. It's got nothing to do with anything statistical. It's purely down to the animation. And that's part of why the spear malus exists as well, otherwise there'd be no reason to bring regular infantry. You could argue that that's why spears were so effective in real life, however. This fight continues. Ah, he's going to leave. No. The shame. Well, we'll call that a moral victory for the Numenorian in their ranks then. Still the Numenorian steelbows. It's turned into a bit of a weird end, but it's a weird end that I think holds no hope for the defenders. Steelbows continue to do their thing. I mean, getting in and amongst the ballistas here. Morroquendi bows, I mean, they're not shock infantry in melee. That glaive of theirs does carry with it a bit of an anti-cavalry capability, but it won't be enough to cleave through that Numenorian armour to the extent that they may want. Here are the Numenorian Shield Guard now, arriving on station. I mean, the trebuchet. Are they remounting the trebuchet? Does it still have ammo? And the Numenorian, or the Nimlothian, going to link up with the two Citadel Guardsmen as well, but there's also a clutch more of the Naru. I think is still the same two though that were fighting, because they were both bloodied, although now they again turn around trying to consolidate everything they have. So the Naru claim the moral victory, but I don't know if they will still be alive by the time the Numenorian Shield Guard arrive. Still over 10k frames is a little bit of a strange one in this fight, I must say. I think it might be because the attacking lanes in and amongst those ballistae are so narrow. I have a feeling that as soon as this engagement gets finished up by the Numenorian Shield Guard, we may be engaging in a bit of ×6 speed. I'm just having a look. I mean, yeah, we're down to... I think this may be the first time we've seen over 10k frames still left, and yet 3% of the total forces that started the battle still being active are still here. Again, this sort of spear-on-spear violence. Although, again, the Shield Guard have got that armour piercing, which should help deal with that chainmail that the Gondorian spears are so reliant upon. Defeat a distinct possibility for them, unsurprisingly. Further up here, trying to burrow in. I mean, defeat seems certain now. Again, maybe slightly abandoning their defensive position. May not have been the play there. Numenor will be the only ones left standing come the end of this battle, I would suggest. Again, having that unit of spears in the back pocket has been pretty key, because if not, I would have worried about them, honestly. Again, it could have gone wrong for them, having a unit just way out in no man's land for the end, but in the end it's gone very right for them. Dealing with those trebuchets pretty quickly. The only thing that could turn this around is if there's a surprise unit anywhere. Still, this one Nimlothian Honour Guard still lives. He's doing his thing. As he slowly creeps towards that front line. Don't think there's anything else that the defenders will be able to call upon. It's always an interesting thing when you're trying to determine whether or not, especially seeing as the number of frames that are left, there may be a hidden unit, but I really don't think there is. given the value of the units that we've seen fall up until this point. Mark Bo's doing quite well for themselves, though. I mean, it's going to be the finest of margins here. I just don't see any way around this unit of healthy shield guard. Even if those Morroquendi bows are successful, they're going to be so battered by the end of it that I don't think it really matters. Need to finish off the Trebuchet crew routing. One Nimlothian. Are we going to have that fight after all? Spear on spear violence. They were fighting for quite a while, and it looks as though we are actually going to get it. Denied it up until this point in the battle. Just have one quick look up there. Steel bows 16, Morroquendi bows 14, so fighting one another to a standstill. Citadel guard over there. But once again, we rejoin. And once again, it's going to be parry. Watch this be a quick affair. I mean, maybe the entirety of these frames is just this singular engagement playing itself out. I mean, the Narinaru has more readily managed to stagger the Honor Guardsman. Parried as well. I mean, both are exhausted, unsurprisingly. Both are eager. Eager for the final duel. Surely that arm piercing would be enough. I mean, although, you know, the more he can parry those blows, the less armor piercing is actually going to find its way to him. This is also a pretty good example of how even bodyguard spears with armor piercing, that spear malice is still very much present. I want to miss the conclusion of this one, but just to quickly, Numenorian shield guard moving over there. Morroquendi bows actually, victorious in the end. How many of them live? 14 and 8 respectively. Not enough to deal with the shield guard. Indeed, nothing the defenders have left is going to be enough to deal with that at this point, unless they pull out a unit of like Rangers of Nimrodel from nowhere. Although they would have had to have supreme discipline to keep them hidden until this moment. Also, I don't think there's a part of the map they could have hidden them in that the attackers wouldn't have uncovered them. I guess as well, I mean, the Narinaru Royal Guard have undergone a few iterations, but the extremely defensive nature of them makes it difficult for many a unit to crack their hard shell. We'll keep an eye on that one. Meanwhile, surely this is going to be the end. All of these engagements are pretty narrow. One of the stranger home stretches to a battle I think we've seen in quite a while. Dorwinion still fighting away. This is probably the longest noticeable 1v1 that we've seen in a battle replay in maybe ever. Especially one that was broken up and then was reignited later. Again, another stagger. Every one of the Nimlothians hits, though, is a little bit more substantial. Ooh. Stun locked. Surely this is going to be the end now. Manages to regain his composure. Continues to fight. And I guess that is going to be where the battle ends, because there's only one Morroquendi bowman over here. And surely the spears are going to simply squash them. So I guess the entire rest of the battle must be these two. Times 6 speed. This is how the battle will be retold at this speed in generations hence. They were simply so fast. The greatest combatants the world has ever seen. these two, effectively royal guard spears, household guard of the rulers of the relative nations at play here. The overall outcome of the battle, of course, at this point is in no doubt whatsoever. Yeah, I guess this fight, I mean, if you combine the first instance of the battle happening and then the rejoining around the 10k frame mark, probably about 13k as a 1v1. Not even sure Gandalf versus the Balrog lasted this long. But there you have it. Again, if I had to guess, I would still say the Nimlothian Honor Guardsman because of the extra attacking edge that that unit tends to have, and the fact that it is a dedicated bodyguard spear unit as opposed to a hybridized with an archer. But this does go to show how tanky the Naren Royal Guard are. They're able to take a real beating. Ah, there we go. And there we have it. In the end, the Nimlothian Honor Guardsman does win this epic duel. Still some sort of fighting going on over here. Oh, it must be the Citadel Guardsman. We will continue to time 6 speed because at this point it's really just hunting down the opposition. So the attackers do win, and there's one Gondor infantryman up there as well. There really was no doubt in the end who the overall victor would be. But, I have to say, some interesting twists and turns in that battle. That 1v1 that lasted a long time just being one example of such a thing. And yeah, momentum shifts in this battle were numerous, shall we say. Both sides claimed the advantage and then lost it again, and either side was really real game of tug of war there. But I think probably the most significant one, Isengard advancing up the hill was big because they were able to do so in force. And also it meant that the final engagements were not happening with the defenders fighting from a position of strength at the top of the hill. They had to fight kind of uphill and use their artillery uphill as well. So you could say that come the end of the game was difficult, but also Isengard, they didn't really let the defenders reclaim that position. Like, it was going to be difficult to stop that force once the gates were open, so to speak. But I don't think anyone played particularly badly. I think it was just the way that the battle went. It turned a little bit chaotic. There was a lot of back and forth. Both sides were actively trying to do things, though, which is always a good sign, and always will net you points in my eyes. So let's see what did the damage for Isengard. Ballista getting 251 kills is pretty decent, considering I said that this map it could be difficult for the Ballista to get good angles, but in the end they were able to get some good kills off against some decent forces as well. At the top of the hill they managed to kill off some Citadel Guard and the like. And considering the margins by which this battle was won, all of those kills would have been important. Infantry and raiders obviously in huge numbers, and that was part of the reason Isengard were able to surge forward in the way they did. Champions of the White Hand may be less impressive. The only thing we really saw of them was the little clip with the general perishing, so that's worth bearing in mind as well. It doesn't always pay off bringing high-end cavalry to this sort of thing. Nazkai did well, Berserkers did well, Trolls did very well, so all of the damaging units for Isengard were the centrepiece, and then all of their more numerous infantry units around them to defend them and keep them alive as long as possible was the key for this particular army. Also interesting to see Isengard without their pikes, which is a real rarity. But yeah, the attackers managing to win, which actually, based on what we've seen from the new patch replays so far, more often than not the defenders have been victorious. So this is a bit of a rarity in the sense that TS's battles that he has sent in have been victories for the attackers. So there is that. So yeah, big thank you to him for sending these two replays in. Big thanks to all the players as well for being a part of this battle replay and the one previous. As far as what's going to be coming up next, I'm not sure. I'll have to trawl through the reserves to see what's going on. There was a Rivendell replay, but the gap of victory was simply too high in favour of the team on the defence, so I can't really show that one. And also Rivendell is a set piece map that I'd rather it be something of really high quality if we're going to show that map again. So I won't be able to do that one, unfortunately, but there are a few others that we have in the chamber and in the interim as well. If people send me specific games, especially with maps that we haven't seen up to this point in this cycle, new maps or big set piece maps as well. Obviously, they tend to get bumped to the front of the queue. Also, something that's going to be upcoming soon is going to be a bit of a sneak peek of an update that Silmarillion is undergoing, a new faction, I believe. So might see a pitch battle replay or something along those lines of that sometime soon, which may very well end up being a midweek slot game, which will break up as well the channel or the faction overviews that we've been doing as well, which will continue, of course. By the time this one comes out, I think we'll have just finished all of the Arnorian petty kingdoms and going into Angmar, and then a few of the factions on the eastern side of the Misty Mountains as well. So we're making good progress on that, more or less at the halfway point, I think. So those will be trundling along, and on the tail end of that we'll do some top 10s as well. But enough rambling from my side. Big thank you to TS once again, big thanks to all the players. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.